Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this special edition episode, I joined Dave Poirier, CEO at the Poirier Group, for a live and interactive discussion on the state of retail, the structural implications of the COVID era to the supply chain and beyond, and how corporate culture and organizations will need to continue to adapt to changes in how we work, how consumers shop, as we look forward to into the future, the post-vaccine world.
Great point about being careful around drawing too many conclusions. I think the favorite quote I have that relates to that was from a guy named Warren Bennis. And he said, it's difficult to unlearn the things that made you successful in the past. And you know, I've always carried that around. I thought it's very relevant in past times as well as what we're going through here. And speaking of that, you know, we've seen some retailers that have done phenomenally well. You know, grocery, pet stores, Ren's Pets. We were on a panel together, and so they've had a great ride. How do they take it from being a ride to being momentum for the organization and carrying on?
Let's listen in now.
David Poirier is the founder and CEO of the Poirier Group. He provides leadership and perspective, acquired over 25 years of successful C-suite experience with major national and international organizations. David works with leaders to create and translate strategic roadmaps into actionable results, helping organizations achieve their full potential. He brings a unique set of tools, methodologies, and techniques aimed at improving operations in U.S., Canada, and international businesses. And he thrives at affecting cultural shifts that impact positively on bottom-line performance.
Great. Thank you very much, Maggie. Appreciate the introduction. Mike, I'm thrilled to have you on to have this kind of conversation. And it's quite unique to change it around in that I'm going to be doing some of the questioning of you about the industry rather than the other way around. Welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Glad to. So we're going to tap into your insights and ability to provide some overview of the retail industry. It's certainly been a crazy time. You and I worked together a long time ago at Hudson's Bay Company, and we thought that was a crazy time, but certainly the last year has really reset things for many within the industry. And there's been a lot of innovation as we've chatted about offline. Let's level set. So what are some of the best and worst innovations that you've seen over the last year and pivots that you've seen in retail, whether it be supply chain or marketing campaigns or product launches that really come to mind for you?
We're in this now, a year anniversary. Every single retailer of every single type have had to pivot in ways they never imagined. Whether they were nimble enough to do so, they were forced to do so. I mean, think back to a year ago. Where do we find plexiglass? How do we stand up curbside? How do we stand up a website you can shop from? I mean, these things were not for them all. They were not ready and not set to go. So I've seen incredible pivots around standing up curbside. Curbside jumps out to me particularly because it touches both e-commerce, touches operations, and touches every piece of the puzzle. And there's retailers who didn't have enough servers to handle the traffic. Like I don't want to fatigue the word unprecedented, but it is such an unprecedented time, and they needed to stand this all up. And in some ways it worked, in some ways it doesn't. Listen, sometimes duct tape allows you to stand it up quick. Other times it is very difficult to go from 5 curbside orders to 500 within the space of about a month. So I think, it's a testament to the flexibility of the industry. And let's not forget the suppliers, the vendors. This was tremendous pressure in the supply chain. Again, think back to this time last year where we were starting to see stockouts on the shelves. You had consumers who started to be very, very worried. I mean, consumers who are loading up on toilet paper. And it really exposed, I think, and this is a theme that will run through our conversation, it really exposed some both strengths and weaknesses in supply chain and operations, right? Where I spent a lot of time explaining to media and talking about the nature of supply chain and just-in-time supply chain. The fact that back rooms have disappeared for most retailers, that really the reason they didn't have anything on the shelf was because they didn't have anything in stock. And that's the way the system was designed. It was designed to be rapid, to be able to respond quickly. and be able to bring in goods when and, the right goods at the right time. As you said, you and I have a great history working in stores and mass merchants where you're chronically bringing in the wrong thing at the wrong time. Those days are by and large, muted, but it did mean that the product wasn't where we thought it would be. And then, listen, at this time last year, we weren't even sure if the border was going to be open for essential goods to travel back and forth. And the supply chain is so long and so complicated. So I think, listen, the best in class, we saw retailers stand up curbside. We saw retailers adopt safety measures regardless of the expense. And I heard that a lot from retailers. I found it very impressive. They said, somebody put a form down in front of them and said, we need to get plexiglass up on 5,000 cash registers. And, no doubt it would be good to be a plexiglass salesperson last year. That was such an incredible, just sign it. We need to take care of our people. We don't know how this, at this point, we don't even know if that works. How do we find PPE? Where do we find PPE? Some retailers had the benefit, I guess you could say, of, international sourcing. So they had a hint more than others of what was happening. None of us really, in this time last year, Jan, Feb, or whatever it was, we were thinking this was a supply chain issue, or are we going to be able to get our products from China? And then it became, the notion, what if this comes here? And then it became, well, I guess we're not going to have a great tourist year. And then it became, that's going to cast a shadow on the year. Then it's going to become, oh my goodness, it's here and we've got liquidity problems. They started canceling POs. That passed, I think, in weeks, not months, that it became readily apparent that the world was not going to end, but that the crisis was real.
Yeah, so true. And, we really have seen a lot of innovation within the retail sector, and a number of organizations are planning on keeping the pace of innovation going. How do you feel that that's going to unfold for the industry? There have always been innovative leaders, but the pace and the degree of innovation that we've seen over the last year has been unprecedented. So how do retailers keep that momentum going?
Well, that's a great question, because there's two things that I think help that pace and momentum really anchor in. First of all was the mission, right? You know better than anyone that aligning people in an organization is not the easiest thing in the world to do, right? So sometimes it's difficult to get everyone aligned, moving in the same direction. And I think, if you step back and understand the COVID crisis, everyone was aligned on the mission. We're going to keep our people safe. We're going to keep the stores open. We're going to understand, how to stand up curbside. It was a galvanizing moment. We're all suddenly working at home. Like there was never a time when everyone was so galvanized. Maybe never. I mean, in times of war or other crisis, or, retailers deal with crisis all the time, right? You get a fire in Fort McMurray and your store's burning down. Crises are not unheard of, nothing of this scope and scale. So A, you had that. B, I think, and this continues in my mind today, that there's a bit of a mulligan from consumers. In other words, there's forgiveness for a lack of perfection. And in my mind, and I'm answering your question in a bit of a roundabout way, what made it successful? A, the total alignment on the mission, and then B, the fact that the consumers were ready to give forgiveness and understand. It was all very uncertain. Now, I think what will stand out as we move forward is that mission is starting to fatigue a little bit, right? I mean, it's all still there, but it's been a long time, right? It's hard on the people, thanks to the miracle of the vaccine. There's an end point to this all. The goalposts seem to move almost on a daily basis. Certainly, we're in the middle of it now in many provinces, notwithstanding the Atlantic provinces. The goalposts are moving, but at least we could see that there's an end zone, right? Can you imagine this time if we didn't have the vaccine on the horizon? And let's just keep that in mind, right? This is the fastest vaccine development in the history of medicine. The other fastest one was 4 years. I think what retailers learned is, how to overcome the department of no. In other words, good enough doesn't need to be perfect. Now, one of my questions for you is, how do organizations avoid that regression to the mean, right? How do we capture that energy? How do we capture that excitement and keep going with it as the mission starts to, thankfully, really go away, right? As COVID starts to get under control, the mission starts to become, let's get back to business, and let's get back to comps, and let's get back to finding vendors, and let's get back to negotiations, and what did we learn? I hope the organizations that we deal with whether they be retailers or whether they be providers, have learned that they don't have as much time as they think they have to become remarkable. I have a podcast with Steve Dennis, Remarkable Retail. He's got his new book that's just been published. And we talk often about why it takes a crisis to make change happen, to create innovation. That is a constant discussion. Now, he comes from organizations like Sears and Neiman Marcus. He knows of what he speaks, and his clients, you do as well. Without a crisis, what does it take? And I think retailers will find out they don't have as long as they think to change. That pace will not slow down. Dave, it's interesting. I would love to what you think. I believe that there's going to be this halcyon days as stores open up again and consumers flood back into stores, and it's going to mask weaknesses. It's going to I think everyone wants to get back to a normal life, right? So I think you saw it last week, a week and a half ago in Ontario, the day or two before, we kind of went into gray zone, semi-lockdown. Yeah. We were hitting the emergency brake. I've lost track of all those phrases. Whatever we were doing, the malls had to shut down at 2:00 in the afternoon. Square One, Yorkdale, they were packed. And I think you're going to see this rush back to normality. You certainly saw a glimpse of it last year when things simmered down. E-commerce reduced, store traffic increased. And then, so it's going to mask probably some weaknesses, right? Advice to retailers is consider this next 7-8 months like a mulligan. You still, I believe, have some permission to try things. This is a great time to do that. A year from today will not. A year from today, we will see a second tranche of, back to reality, back to comps. And for some retailers, those comps are going to be pretty ugly. Like, on the other side, how do you get a great comp? You have a terrible year. So I guess our friends in apparel, for some of them, are going to have, fantastic comps. But other retailers, it's not going to be, they're going to have to adjust to whatever the new abnormal, the new normal looks like. So it's going to be, it's going to be a fascinating time as all these adjustments need to happen and will happen.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think we're going to see some significant boost in consumer demand. There's talk of $200 billion that's been saved up during the pandemic. And I think we are going to see people wanting to celebrate their freedom, whether that be through travel and leisure or through acquiring things that they haven't been able to or haven't needed over the last little while, but just going out and having some fun and enjoying what they used to enjoy. It doesn't take long for Canada to blow through $200 billion in savings, though. And I think the underlying economy likely isn't going to be as healthy as what everybody is hoping it's going to be. And the end result, still with unemployment higher than what it was previous to the pandemic, is going to carry forward. There's more diversity of wealth within Canada as well. So that's going to be more challenging with the wealthier people having more money. And, as somebody was saying to me yesterday, are people with that extra money really going to go buy a third car or a fourth car? Or, are they going to buy a second or third house? Likely not. And so I think we may see that being diverted to investments and to paying down debt as well. So I think there are some rough roads ahead a year from now as well. I agree with you. And it's going to be a real challenge, right, for the retailers to be able to predict this. I mean, being a fashion buyer or category manager now is a pretty tough thing, figuring out next spring at this point.
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the economic conditions, because you're right. I call it the stockpile, right? This massive amount of money, the savings rates off the charts. I think the savings rate in Canada has gone from 1% in Q1 2019 to like 14%, like numbers we've never seen before. But it's enforced savings, right? I can't spend it. I can't travel. I can't do all the things I want. I can't go to restaurants. That will be unleashed. Some of it will write down household debt. That's good for retailers because it creates more open to buy in the long run. So I think we should be optimistic about that. The IMF is calling GDP growth in Canada 5% this year. That's fantastic. I think next year could be strong as well, because this isn't going to be a flick of a switch, right? This isn't going to be hey, the pandemic's over, everybody, let's party, right? I think it's going to be we're still in for a long run, and I think that'll be a governor on the growth. I think there'll be inflation. that will come and take place. I mean, we see it in the supply chain. There's got to be some inflation that's going to be creeping in somewhere, somehow. We know it's going to happen in food. Sylvain Charlebois, my partner on the Food Professor podcast, did great work each and every year with these economic models and AI. And he's actually stunningly correct in how much households will spend on food. He says that's going to go up 4 to 6% alone. And that makes up, a large part of people's spending and disposable income, certainly at the value level. I think you're going to see all this release. Some of it, a lot of it's going to go into services. Some retailers will be able to take advantage of that. Some will not. Listen, how many of us want to go travel, get in an airplane and go sit on a beach or go somewhere? I mean, those things will start back up again. Good if you sell luggage and fitness wear and all those great things. I think it's an interesting idea about what and how people will spend their money. And I think the economy is going to be further, and you touched on it, further bifurcated, right? So you've got, I think those both societal and economic bifurcations have become very pronounced. Now, if you look at the unemployment rate in Canada, it's actually pretty good. But if you parse it out and look at the unemployment rate at households 70 and above, it's very low. It's record low. But if you look at it, 30, 50, you're into 20%, 25% right now. And now a lot of that is services, right? So services need to come back. When I talk to my colleagues in the restaurant business, they're like, listen, your economy is not going to get going until you get us open again. And by the way, you're going to have to keep those wage subsidies going. The restaurant industry, unlike, the good news, I guess, about retail is it's not good news, but there's been record good and record bad. But in restaurants, it's been just pretty much record bad, right? Other than QSR, it's been very difficult. It's been a struggle. They need help. That needs to come up. That needs to happen to get the economy going. That's a huge, huge part of the economy. Now, one thing I wanted to add, and this is, when I wanted to ask you if you thought, and this is kind of a thread of conversation, we talk a lot about what has happened. What is going to be new? Because we know things have been accelerated and changed, the pace of change, e-commerce, the poster child for acceleration, right? 70% growth in e-commerce in Canada, give or take, if not more. Work from home. And I continue to think the work from home movement will be one of the most biggest, long-lasting changes. And it's funny, Dave. It's not like you couldn't send all your people who work in your company at home in the before time. You could do that, but culturally it's different, right? It's very culturally different. And I talked to a couple of retailers, and they've recently hired very senior roles outside of where they physically are. And before, it's not like you couldn't do that before. You could hire from anywhere. You could hire from Tibet if you wanted pre-COVID. That's not new. But what is new is the culture. Yes, I can have my vice president of marketing in Toronto and I'm in Windsor. I can do that now. Culturally, I don't know if that's going to last. I'd love to get your opinion on that. You've forgotten more about companies' culture than I even know. Not even that I have, but than I even know. But if you think about the culture, now that opens up tremendous opportunities for small regional retailers who then have a pool of labor that's Canada-wide, worldwide. But let's just say it's Canada-wide. That's phenomenal. But now let's think about the rewiring of commerce. Let's just look at Toronto. The numbers are something like 475,000 people come and go on a day-to-day basis in downtown Toronto. Of course, that's pre-COVID, right? 475,000 people come and go each and every work day in the downtown core. That's everything from service to workers to whatever. That's, right now, that's next to nothing. We're stay at home. What's that going to look like post-COVID, right? Is that going to look like 2/3? Okay, let's say it's 2/3. Because I think if I told you, or if you told me that no one's going back to the office, and if someone else said everybody's going back to the office, we're both wrong. I think both of us are wrong. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's 2/3. Whatever that number is, we've talked about the hybrid approach, all that stuff.
Right.
But let's do, you're way better at math than I am, but let's do the 2/3 number on that 475,000 people. Boy, that's a lot of people that are not showing up to downtown. Again, the upside is follow the customers, follow the money. That means they're working from their home office. What does that mean? More e-commerce. That is 1 + 1. when people are at home, and we've seen it. I've seen some numbers out of Amazon Prime numbers, some research from I think it was E&Y. They said, listen, it's a factor of X increase of e-commerce shopping when you work from home. And the second part is maybe they're going to shop locally, right? Like I live in western part of the city in the GTA. I can't count the number of times I've been into downtown Toronto. I can find everything here. And I think retailers will need to react to that. And the good news, this kind of, when your toast falls off your breakfast table and lands butter side up, the good news is there's real estate to be had now. In the medium term, you will see a reorientation of where the stores are and a reconfiguration to some degree. I mean, no, I wouldn't advise anybody to rush into any of this, because I think anyone who knows the answers to some of these questions or says they know the answer is probably wrong, because we don't. But these are the things I'm watching, and these are the things I would say that retailers would keep a close eye on, is how do I recalibrate? Maybe I need more stores in the burbs, less downtown. Maybe the stores are pop-up, right? Maybe the stores are there Monday to Friday. Maybe they go in a particular place, follow the customer. And that kind of innovation, that DNA of innovation has to be there. And I think for those that are there, they need to be remarkable. This was the case pre-COVID. It's going to be the case post-COVID. You're good. You have good service. You have good assortment. It's okay. Everything's fine. It's not going to be good enough, and that's going to get more pronounced than less pronounced.
Yeah, and picking up on the trends that you were talking about. I've got a place near the Collingwood area. Real estate sales have doubled over last year. It's just incredible. It's up 100% over last year. Yeah. And so these are people that are not saying, well, let's get out of the city for a few months. They're placing a bet that their life is going to be from Collingwood, or Barrie's the same thing. Aurelia's going through it. Bracebridge, lots of cities and towns that are more than a reasonable commute away from Toronto. And so these folks are making lifestyle changes. Yeah. And I think there are going to be certainly most of the retailers that we're working with, most of the companies that we're working with, are looking to hybrid solutions going forward for their office staff anyway. And I think we'll see that.
I think they're more brave than I would be, I think, when it comes to that. And I don't know. I think it's a little early to call. I always think about regression to the mean. When I look at crises that were similar to this, so to speak, let's go back to 9/11, and we all said we'd never do an in-person meeting anymore, never got on an airplane, and we'd all be traveling less. Well, in 5 years, we were setting records in terms of travel. So, I'm always hesitant to use the words "this changes everything." I do think from a hybrid perspective, maybe you've got to go in 2 days a week, okay, so you can move up north. I interviewed great thought leader Rashad Tabakawala, and I asked him questions about why the smart money was going in two different directions. So you see Facebook, you see Amazon, you see big companies taking out millions of square feet in Hudson Yards in New York, an office building. And then you see other people going in the completely opposite direction. Forever, you'll be able to work at home. I never believed that, by the way. Forever, this whole forever, that could be changed pretty easily. And he said something interesting. He said, and again, this relates back to your particular expertise. He said it's because they're a cult, not a culture. And it is the place where you go to get indoctrinated into the culture of the organization. And, for younger, it depends on who your clientele is. And he was saying, listen, Facebook is basically running a Match.com in their head offices. It's the place where young people meet each other. I mean, it brings excitement. I mean, listen, working remotely is not for everybody, right? It is not for everybody. And I have a question for you. How, in your mind, I know that you're supposed to be asking me questions, but I'm going to ask you a few questions.
I'm surprised you waited this long, actually.
well, how do you facilitate so the mission, let's say the mission is over, right? We're past COVID. We're in normal times. How do you facilitate a culture where you've got this, several key people, perhaps lots of people on Zoom or on remote, not always in the office. There's not the ad hoc pop your head in the meeting. Hey, Dave, I was thinking of this. What do you think? it's an effort to get in touch with your boss and say, I got an idea, or your colleagues. How do you build a culture around that? What are your thoughts on that?
It's far more challenging. I mean, we face that challenge ourselves, and we have a great culture. The team are just phenomenal with one another, and we take approaches that are a little bit different for that, to build trust within the organization. It's more difficult over video conferencing than it is in person. We used to all get together on Friday afternoons and have a chat and, toast of the week and enjoy each other's company, have spontaneous conversations. Those things are difficult now. And we've looked to mechanisms to do that. We have to draw back to, what are the core values of the business, and what are the behaviors that you want to have that are consistent with those core values, and really walk the talk, whether that be virtually or in person. That it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort. It worked out great for us. I mean, we won that Canada's Most Admired Corporation, very exciting. And the team was really pumped up because they really did it. And so it's a lot of what we're doing right now to improve performance of organizations includes a significant effort on the culture and values side of things, creating alignment amongst the leadership, making sure that people are walking the talk, that the behaviors are consistent with those values within the organization, and increasing communication so people understand the why behind decisions. And often, and we've seen this over the last year, a lot of decisions were made very, very quickly, not necessarily explained to the employees or the staff, but they did it because they knew that they were on a mission of survival.
Right.
And there was a rallying point for the organization. As we come out of this, it's going to be really critical for great performers to continue to have that rallying cry, that the thing that's going to align all of their team members towards a goal that's exciting for them and can touch them personally in a positive way.
Now, if you and I were having this discussion in the before time, you probably would have said many of those same things, I would bet, in terms of how to galvanize a culture, right? I mean, as I listen to you, what's different? So what do you need to do? Is it just you need to actually execute on all these key things, and that's not always done? Is there anything you can think of that you would advise the listeners, advise the viewers, advise your clients that is different fundamentally coming out of this for the next couple of years to foster a culture that is different advice than you might have given them a year ago?
There are a couple of things. I think certainly with this experience of working from home or working virtually, whether as teams or individuals, there are challenges with it. And back a year ago, I did a webinar. Just about 10 months ago, I did a webinar. And one of the things that I said in there is it takes 21 days to form a habit, but it takes 66 days for that habit to become permanent and unconscious. And here we are approaching 400 days.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those habits, the lifestyle habits that we've created over the last year are going to be fairly permanent. There's going to be a real stickiness to them. And one of the things is people's lack of desire to get in the car and drive for an hour to work. Yeah. There's a lot of resistance, and we're finding that even with new employees in organizations saying, well, do I have to commute? And how often do I have to do it as conditions of employment? That didn't exist before. And so I think we're going to see that people will make different choices and priorities going forward. Sure, everybody will love to get together, but there'll be things that they'll have much less tolerance for than they did before because they were used to it. It was a habit before. And I think we're going to see that. We're going to see that's going to play out in a couple of ways. So one is the employees saying, I want to work from home. I want to work from wherever I work. My son is working for a retailer in Toronto, out in BC, very close to a ski hill. So he can live the perfect life out there right now. So there's a huge advantage to that. There's also the other side of it in that there's less loyalty both ways. So if I'm paying somebody, $110,000 in Toronto, to do a task, and now they're working remote. Should I hire them in Manitoba instead for 90,000, or perhaps in the Maritimes for 80,000, or perhaps somewhere else offshore for 35,000? And we've all gone through bad experiences on offshoring, but those are much more realistic possibilities now than they were before. And likewise, for a person sitting at home doing their work in front of a screen, the barrier of resistance to switching jobs is dramatically smaller now. You're doing the same job and somebody else offers you $3,000 more, and you get to sit in the same seat in your basement or in the dining room. Why not? So I think those are challenges that we're going to face on both sides.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, at the end of the day, it does come back to company culture. I think it's harder to establish, but I think companies should be open to thinking very innovatively about how they get people together. And listen, there's some economic benefits we haven't talked about the work from home movement for companies, right? I talked to a CEO. He said, "Listen, I may or may not sign that new lease on that new building. I may not need that space. Now I got to stretch people out more than I had before." There's some serious upside economics to the work from home movement if it works, right? If you get the productivity, there's a bunch of caveats to that statement, but just alone there's some economic incentive. So why not take some of that money and say, well, this week's meeting is we're all getting on a train and we're going to Montreal for a couple of days, because that's how we're going to build our team. We're not going to build our team by bringing you in for the next 3 weeks, but then we're all going to, we're going to a sandy beach somewhere. But that's not like a once in a year reward. That's how we build culture. And maybe there's money in place for that. One thing I think, Dave, and this is my second follow-up question to you, I think this is a really gnarly one, particularly in retail, where you have literally millions of frontline workers. I mean, the vast amount of, 2.1 million Canadians are in the retail industry. The vast amount of them are on the front lines. As head office people, it was always the case of we're at work, you're at work, right? There was that kind of parity from a culture perspective. I'm safe in my, my basement in the Muskokas, but you're on the front lines seeing customers. And even in the good times, customers can be pretty wacky. It's fun in retail, but sometimes, it's not so fun. How do you balance that culture, the we're all in it together, between the field and the head office?
Absolutely. And I think we really have to be thoughtful about it, not just in retail, but in CPG and other industries as well, where, their bonuses were paid during that time and they were fairly quickly removed. Some of them have stepped back. Anthony Longo made a stand on that a little while ago to replace it. And so I think organizations are really going to be thoughtful about that. It's going to be tough because I think purse strings will be held pretty tight by CFOs around North America as we go forward, because they've seen what kind of savings have been generated by having people not go to conferences, not have offsites, not do the kind of travel that they had before, and yet the organization's still surviving. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon those that are really committed to the culture of the organization and the values of the organization to prove the financial connection to that. And I think it is easily done, but it's not been a traditional focus that organizations have had, particularly for larger organizations. It's been much more mechanical and get it down to the commoditized tasks within stores and within warehouses and within manufacturing plants. And we have to make sure that for those individuals, it's meaningful work and they feel a real sense of contribution of how they make a difference as an individual to the organization and vice versa. So they feel that they're contributing in a way that's fulfilling for them. And it's easily done when you have clear communication, when you have discipline, when you have alignment, when you have clear strategy, and a rallying cry for organizations. Well, I want to turn it back to you well, and ask you some questions. So there are a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, really around all this innovation that we've seen over the last year. Was it truly innovative, or was it just getting the house in order? Did it really create innovation for organizations, or was it merely expediting the existing initiatives to get where we are? And what does that mean for the future?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think in some ways, I'd answer it in three ways. In some ways, some retailers just caught up to where they should have been to begin with. Maybe that was e-commerce. Maybe that was curbside. Two, I think some genuine innovation happened more behind the scenes than on the shop floor. Now, we could talk innovation about how to keep my people safe, how they adapted to PPE and all those things. I think there was more reaction than innovation. I think that there's a lot of innovation happened in the supply chain, more so than anywhere else. I think there's a lot of innovation there. And I think there's innovation, and I don't know how to classify this. I'm kind of on the fence about it. You now see the use of social media, these things advanced years. Now, was it coming anyway? Does it fall into that first bucket? You should have been doing it anyway. You should have been building community anyway. I'm not sure, because I think the innovative use of social media, it was on the fence. Look at, flyers, right? We had retailers suspending flyers, finally doing that test that they always wanted to do. But we're always so afraid, to. It's a really good question, because I think what the COVID era has done, if we learn the right lessons from it, is lay down the framework of innovation more than generated innovation. Organizations learned that they could move faster than they ever imagined. They could be more nimble than they ever imagined. They could be more resilient than they ever imagined. Again, the caveats are we all had a mission, how to capture and stay focused and grab that innovation. I think the innovation, this period will spur dramatic innovation. If you're a retailer in Canada, you're just trying to figure out if you're allowed to stay open on any given day. It's tough. You're open. You're trying to figure out what color code you are, for goodness sakes, in different coasts. One thing I wanted to pick up on that you said is about experience. I talked to a fantastic author, Emery Sawyer, who wrote a book called The Myth of Experience, and I'd recommend it for anyone on this call. Run, don't walk, to go buy that book. And it's a very approachable book, but he basically says, be careful what you learn. The experience isn't always the best teacher. What we take away from this, and what you got me thinking about, was, how CFOs are saying, listen, I took away all this stuff, no muffins at meetings, which you and I kind of chuckle about sometimes. That doesn't get us anywhere. But there was a lot of things, maybe it's flyers. We didn't spend that and the sales still came. Yeah, okay, but this was the most unusual of times. You can't parse those two thoughts out and not have them in the same sentence. So I think my advice is, be careful the lessons you learn from this period, and that goes through how consumers behave, that goes to how your organizations behave, and just because you were able to suspend flyers, no more conferences, no more travel, doesn't mean that will work after COVID. But anyway, so it's just my thought around, be careful the lessons we take away from this period, other than to understand, and I don't think any of us do yet, how consumer behavior is going to change in meaningful ways, right? As you said, time to learn a habit. Whatever those times are, we've passed them. Roger Martin has a great book, and one of the things he talks about is how consumer behaviors are like, eroding assets on your balance sheet. And that's the case in normal times, right? A lot of what consumers do, you and I, the people listening, do is, a little by rote, right? By habit. I go to the same grocery store. I go here. I go there. I do that. I go to work 5 days a week. I do all those things. A lot of those behaviors are going to change in ways we don't quite understand. Some of it is going to be driven by work from home. Some of it's going to be externally driven. Some of it's just going to be, maybe my priorities are different now. Maybe I enjoyed that time with my family. Maybe I'm going to spend my money differently. Maybe I've had the chance to reconsider my life. Maybe, maybe I'm going to eat differently. Maybe I'm going to eat less. Maybe I'm going to eat, anyway. So, but you get the point I think we have to be careful of understanding what's to happen. Long answer to a short question.
I agree. And a great point about being careful around drawing too many conclusions. I think the favorite quote I have that relates to that was from a guy named Warren Bennis. And he said, it's difficult to unlearn the things that made you successful in the past. And I've always carried that around. I thought it's very relevant in past times, as well as what we're going through here. And speaking of that, we've seen we've seen some retailers that have done phenomenally well. Grocery, pet stores,
Yep.
Ren's Pets. We were on
Yep.
to get a panel together. So they've had a great ride. How do they take it from being a ride to being momentum for the organization and carrying on with the success next year and beyond?
Well, that's literally the multi-billion-dollar question. I mean, the tailwind behind grocery is not going to be repeated. There will be, I have a food podcast, and I talk to restaurateurs and people in the food industry, and I ask them this question: do you think what do you think is going to be the outcome? We've all been eating and making more meals than we ever imagined we would. Are people going to be more discerning when they go to a restaurant, more demanding, saying, listen, I can make that at home, you better do better? Are they going to be, I don't care what you make me, I'm just sick of cooking, so just make me something? Or is it going to be somewhere in between? What I'm getting at there is there is no question that the momentum is going to shift back, like a pendulum, is going to shift back to food service. Some of it will stay in grocery. I think that's where the grocers can win. That will resume. But those who've taken this opportunity to learn and innovate and don't take the foot off the gas for innovation, I think there's a risk. The numbers just come in. The numbers just come in, right? I mean, now they're getting into a comp basis where the numbers aren't coming in, right? So now they're on the downside of great comps starting like now, where they're going to have to comp off, the crazy times in the beginning of the pandemic. But I do think that retailers need to go back to basic principles. They need to be remarkable. I think we kind of go and reset. How to capture that momentum, how to capture those sales is really going to be proving your worth to the customer. I also think we should talk about sustainability, because sustainability took a bit of a backseat. You mentioned it about employees. I think also employees, particularly younger employees, they want to care about the place they work, and they want to see that company that does well and does all those things. I think that's going to get accentuated. I also think that sustainability will come roaring back in even stronger than it did. The good news is all those investments that went into sustainability initiatives have not in any way, shape, or form sunk costs. I think they've been credits in the bank of the future. As we had to shift to plastic bags instead of refillable containers because of COVID, that will come back, and I think that will come back even stronger. And I think people will be more thoughtful about what they do, what they eat, what they wear, and then they'll be more like, hey, I got by. I didn't buy as much. This is a bit of a risk. I got by. I didn't buy as much clothes as I did last year, and what I found out, I didn't need it. Now, part of that's I'm not going to the office as much. Part of that is, hey, I didn't really need to buy that stuff. We're not going to know that. We're not going to know that for the next year because everybody's going to rush out and buy stuff. Maybe it's because of the COVID-15, as we call it. Maybe those pants don't fit the way they used to. There'll be a bit of shopping. Maybe a bit of I heard somebody call it revenge shopping, which is a colorful way of saying pent up demand. But we see it, right? People get a glimpse of a normal life, and normal life is shopping, going to restaurants and being with people. And I think we're going to see a lot of that jonesing for normal life come back. Thankfully, we're starting to pick up a bit of pace. It's choppy for the vaccine, but it's coming. We can see it happening in other countries. We can see what's happening. Look to the U.S. We can't always learn a lot of lessons exactly from the U.S. market or the U.K. market, but we can sure see as they start to get past and their vaccination starts to roll out that we see some very important things. I would speaking of vaccinations, I don't want to dwell on that, but I do want to say and talk about vaccine hesitancy. I did an interesting interview with Michelle Sexsmith from Environics Analytics, and they've got this new vaccine hesitancy overlay of their segmentation. Fascinating, right? Because the averages in Canada, for example, is about 15%. That's going to get worse, not better. As AstraZeneca, as Moderna now struggle with, is it good, is it bad, stop, start, you're going to see that number go up, and it's going to be more troublesome than we hope it will be, and there will be hot spots. Look to the States where they've got a lot of, relatively, they've got a lot of vaccinations. You've got big retailers, Target. They're paying their employees to get vaccinated, right? They're giving them, they're not giving them time off. They're giving them like $100 to get vaccinated. I think this is the future in Canada. It's hard to imagine the future today. We don't have enough of the stuff. That will resolve itself, and then we need to align to. Let's make sure and get past it. So I think there's a bit of chop there for sure.
Yeah, and I actually saw a new number this morning. It's 21% now.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise. I was hoping it was going to go the other way when everyone watched millions of Americans, get, the benefit, I guess, of being a slow follower. Millions of Americans get the vaccine, but one or two cases, it starts to put a kernel of doubt in your mind. That kernel could grow. I think we've got a bit of a road ahead of us. So, and retailers and all the people listening have a role to play. And like the American retailers said, listen, we're just going to use the old fashioned method. We're going to pay you cash.
And we're going to see heightened fear lasting for a while in society, I believe, as a result of this. It might not be COVID, but it'll just be about crowds and, avoiding crowds, that sort of thing. That brings me to one of the last questions, which is, we've seen a big push for direct-to-consumer from manufacturers and obviously Amazon as well. So circumvention of the traditional retailing channels within Canada. Where do you see that going? Is that going to continue? Is there going to be a rollback? Is it going to be a roller coaster? What do you think that's going to look like in the next year or two?
I think it's overestimated in the short term and underappreciated in the long term. The COVID era press the gas down on e-commerce, D2C e-commerce, but it didn't put a brick on it. It's gonna fall off. Right now, it feels like everybody's doing everything shopping online. Of course, here in Ontario under stay-at-home orders. My goodness, if you're living in Montreal, you got to be home by 5:00 in the afternoon or something. So I think it will always be the case that certain vendors will have a core audience that will look to them to find the best, the latest, the hottest, right? Nike, for example. So Nike's pulled out 2 weeks ago. Nike pulled out of 7 more retailers, Macy's, for example, just to mention one. But, there's a lot of people who go to the department store and say, I'm just looking for a good pair of runners. I'm not looking for the latest Nike. So I think the disintermediation has been this hovering cloud, the sword of Damocles above retail for, before we even met, like in the late 90s. And I think, it's easier said than done. I've had that experience. Like when you get to a vendor, vendors are very good wholesalers. Becoming a retailer is a very different business. It's a different culture. It's just a different business. The technology is easy. Stand up a Shopify site. That's not hard. I think more will try it, and I think more should try it. But they need to think of their strategy. I don't think, underappreciating channel conflicts and channel strategies goes away. I think there's a way to do it. I think any commodity, anyone listening to this right now who sells something to a retailer has a core audience. That could be 2%, that could be 5%, that could be more, who would look for that kind of innovation, who would buy directly. And that number is going to grow over the long term, for sure. What it's going to grow to, your guess is as good as mine. On the one end of the scale, you've got, Canada Goose talks about wanting to be 75% direct to consumer, with stores and e-commerce, not just e-commerce, and only have 5 or 6, major retailers that they pick and choose. That's a strategy. All I would say to that is it's good to be king. Doesn't last forever. All right. Rapid fire questions. Michael LeBlanc to Dave Poirier. First international vacation destination post-COVID.
Barbados.
Will the Leafs take the North Division or will the Jets zoom past them?
The Leafs will not take the North Division.
Barbecue brisket, ribs, chicken, or plant-based burger?
Chicken.
MBA or experience?
Ideally both.
Morning sit-down breakfast or lunch at your desk?
Oh, gosh, for a morning sit-down breakfast that isn't a weekend. So I'll say morning sit-down breakfast.
Last one, Bitcoin or Vegas?
Vegas at this point.
Good one.
With Bitcoin well north of 60,000, I think who knows what the upside is on it, but it's a fascinating thing to watch.
Well, don't forget that password. It's been such a treat for me to be here. I'd love to come back. I want to thank everybody for joining us, the hardworking men and women in retail and the CPGs that kept us fed, kept food on the shelf, kept products on the shelf, and kept our spirits up. Just from me and my family and my people, I just, it was really appreciated, right? Just a genuine appreciation. And to you, Dave, you've been a longtime supporter of mine, so I really, really appreciate everything you've done for me and everything you do for the industry. Oh,
glad to, Mike. Great chat with you, and thanks for joining us. And thank you all who joined us today. Really appreciate your attention and would love to hear your feedback. If there's anything more we can answer, or if you have some specific questions, please follow up and send them to me or to Mike or both of us, and we'll make sure that they get answered. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.